Good morning, and welcome to 10 Ways to Meaningfully Engage Underrepresented Youth, Organizational and Adult Readiness for Fostering Leadership Development in Youth. My name is Naomi Nichols, and I'm the Director of Knowledge Mobilization for the Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, or YouthREX. This webinar will provide you with valuable insights on how to authentically work with underrepresented or marginalized youth, such that you are effectively developing, inspiring, and nurturing youth leadership and engagement in your organization. The webinar draws from the experiences of two grounded practitioners in the field, Amy and Duane, who work in frontline and management positions in youth-serving organizations. It connects these practice-based knowledges to research evidence from a literature review conducted by Rebecca, who works for the Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange and is also a doctoral candidate in the Faculty of Education at York. The theme of today's webinar, Organizational and Adult Readiness for Fostering the Meaningful Engagement of Underrepresented Youth, aligns with the Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange's commitment to meaningfully engage all youth in our work, specifically those youth who face barriers to participation in traditional leadership opportunities. Youth engagement and participation is embedded in our core values. Young people are seen as important contributors to evaluation processes, and we provide opportunities for young people to participate in YouthREX and develop their leadership capacities in ways that are meaningful to them. We believe the inclusion of young people improves the overall quality of the research and evaluation process and also benefits the wider community. This webinar has been deliberately organized to include the voices of people who work in research settings as well as those people who work in frontline and management positions in youth-serving organizations. We are committed to processes of knowledge exchange, and we see that there is value in creating opportunities for people to speak across their different disciplinary and professional boundaries. We hope that this webinar can be useful to you, can be thought-provoking, and can be the beginning of a larger conversation with you about how we do our work in ways that is respectful and engaging for young people. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoy it.
So we're going to start our top 10 tips of working with underrepresented youth with a definition of who we're actually talking about in this situation. We're giving the context of working not in society with these people, but particularly for organizations. For the definition of youth, it really depends on the government, foundation, or organization. That ranges from 10 years old all the way to 35 years old, depending on who you're talking to and what that organization's policies are. So you'll have to do a little bit of work, or some of you may have experience doing this, but fitting in your program and grant applications into that funder's age bracket. Many people in the sector also argue that youth is a very subjective word, and it describes a particular phase in one's life rather than the actual years that they have been living or existing on this earth. The word underrepresented really just means that they're not represented or treated fairly in government or policies or laws, or represented in mainstream media or institutions. Some of the examples of today are in public education, where history classes are only showing Eurocentric content, where the students in that class might actually be representing a variety of different cultures and continents and countries that we come from. But the actual curriculum doesn't reflect the students that sit in that class. Other examples are First Nation land rights or same-sex marriage, media representing particular groups stereotypically or disempowering, or just are not represented at all in particular films. So that can be film to magazine, newspapers, radio, advertising. You have it. That's kind of everywhere. And the word marginalization or marginalized comes from the Latin word margo, which means the edge, brink, or border. These groups today in 2015 in our current context include people of color who are not Caucasian or coming from Europe or have ancestry from Europe, immigrants, those living with physical or mental disabilities, people who are low income or poor, elderly, unemployed, the LGBTQ spectrum, homeless. The list goes on, unfortunately, in our current context, but these are the people who are pushed out to the margins or the edge of society due to the circumstances of the system. So the system being institutions, policies, and laws, and also culture. So moving on to tip number 1. Tip number 1 is very related. It says, let youth self-identify. And this is really important because in our work, we recognize that these words are very strong. At risk is a very strong word because it implies that they are dangerous or violent or that they are at risk of something unpleasant. It doesn't look at their positive assets or what they actually might be able to contribute into society. Marginalized or youth are also very strong words. And often people who are in this sector or people who just want to help have good intentions, but they might not realize that when you label a young person as these things, they start to have like an identity crisis. They might think, oh, well, I've never really identified myself as at risk of anything, or I've never identified myself as marginalized. I really just see myself as a human being who's just trying to get through each day. I have unique talents and I have unique struggles, and I'm just a human being. I'm a unique human being. And so when you see a young person start to embody these labels, it really does affect the psyche. It affects how they think of themselves, how they see themselves, and also how they interact with the rest of the world. Be careful in meetings, marketing, and grant applications especially. Use your discretion on how the organization embodies these labels internally and externally. We would really recommend that you can have conversations with your staff team about grant applications and how you really choose this type of language, or whether you just decide not to use this type of language in order to describe who you're serving and who you're working with. We've had an example where a young woman who has experience and life experience in the mental health system and with homelessness, she was working for an organization that she knew that her salary was being paid because of a grant that said, we're going to hire a marginalized homeless youth. And her knowing this, especially because it's written all over the website and written all over the social media, no one ever talked to her about those words. And no one ever talked to her about the reality and the honest conversation about, this is why we got this money. It's because we had to call you these labels in order to be able to pay your salary. She had really wanted a staff person to have that conversation with her because she never really identified herself as those words. In other situations, we see that happening in meetings where maybe a partner or an external person comes into a meeting or in an office space and kind of starts throwing these words around, and the youth are right there beside them and they can hear every word. So it's a level of microaggression that can have really impactful effect on a young person's psyche, or on anyone's psyche for that matter. So it's really up to you about how you want to be able to use these words, if you want to get rid of them entirely, or if you would like to have the conversation to keep it different with how the staff and program managers and everyone embody these words and treat young people, or if you would like it to be completely consistent with how you display yourselves externally as well as how you use these words internally. Number 2 on our top 10 list is one-off consultations don't create leaders. Mm-hmm. So focus groups and consultations with youth perpetuate marginalization. We say this because the idea of marginalization is that you're already pushed to the sides. You are not part of the mainstream conversation. Mm-hmm. And by inviting young people to sit at a table for maybe 3 hours to have a pilot, to have a focus group, mm-hmm. you may get some great ideas, you may get some great insight, but remember to think about what that youth's perspective and experience is from that. You can't know an entire youth perspective in 2 hours. Right. And the other thing is that it perpetuates the marginalization, because you're still saying, I'm not going to bring you into and embed you into the mainstream. And in this case, the mainstream is the staff people in the organization. We're only going to keep you on the margins by doing one-off touch-ins with you, or check-ins with you. And that just kind of, it just perpetuates that they're not important enough or don't have enough to offer in order to be embedded in the organization, in the advising, in brainstorming and decision making in the actual organization's programming. And to realize that these young people have a lot to offer. If you can create the space for them, they will absolutely grow in your organization if you create a safe space at that. And that their perspective is often one that is very unique and one that has a lot of assets that can bring your organization up to the next level if you can work with them.
Yeah, I think also the piece we were talking about earlier, that outcomes are really important for youth, especially psychologically boosting, like it just makes you feel like you've accomplished something, right? So if you're involving youth in a project, let them go through the extent of the project and see the end and see the outcome and feel that connection to the project, like they really made an impact and they've seen it come to its fruition and its fulfillment, you know? That way, like, you're getting amazing contribution, because underrepresented youth have a lot to offer, and you're also building up their confidence with further projects that they're going to be embarking on in their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are we ready? Next one. Tip number 3.
Create the sandbox from the get-go. Okay, so this has a lot to do with creative freedom, which is like super important when a youth comes in to work with your organization. They do need to have a level of creative freedom to really express themselves and give some really great like feedback to the organization, or add value to the organization that's going to really grow along the way. However, often the problem with creative freedom, if the parameters of the project are not discussed from the get-go and everyone knows the goals and the objectives and therefore has a sandbox to play in, then sometimes creative freedom can be like, whoa, hey, how'd you end up over there when we wanted this project to be like this, right? So that's why it's important to have really great communication with the youth you're working in, and really give them, like, let them know, like, what is the bigger picture with this project? How is this fitting into your overall organizational mandate? What are we looking to accomplish? What are the things, like, give them specific details about the project so that they can feel like, okay, I have room within these parameters to express myself creatively. This ensures that no one's ideas are getting shut down without understanding why, and it reduces the tension of realistic versus new and innovative. Because the youth will bring a lot of new and innovative ideas, but sometimes they're not realistic to the organizational's mandate. So just having that conversation from the get-go. When you get an idea shut down, psychologically, for the youth, it tells them to shut up and to not like contribute as much, because you don't have that much to offer after all, you know? So just finding the very loving relationship ways of communicating. Okay, well, that's a great idea. This is more what we're looking for. How does that apply here? Or how can we work together with that? And then another big piece of that, sharing work culture expectations. For example, the method of communication and the pace of response that's expected, and also having frequent check-ins with the youth when they're working on the project, so that, you know, you're not just like, here, put this on your lap, and then we check in like a month later when the project is due and be like, so what'd you do? You know, like, rather, if you have like consistent check-ins, you can like even help them with molding the project along the way. And the work culture expectation, it's a big piece because youth are coming into your organization and they may not be used to, for example, make sure you check your email 5 times a day, or like there are a lot of like different cultures that are coming together here. So laying things out from the get-go really helps create a good relationship among all staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the examples I can give is I was working for an organization which I had to do a lot of event planning with, and I've never done event planning before. And in this case, they gave me everything that I needed, all of the tools, all of the contact information and what these contacts would help me do, the budget for the event, what was the vibe that they wanted in this, like the atmosphere and the aura of the event, what type of artistry that did they want at the event, and what was the end goal of this event. And that just created a really great parameter for me to work in and for me to go wild and creative within. But I knew the distinction between what was just a deliverable that I just had to get the job done with, and other times when I knew that this was my kind of world that I could play around and sculpt on my own. And so having that sandbox to kind of play in was absolutely amazing because I felt supported. By creating the parameters actually creates a safe space for support, but it also allowing some freedom and flexibility allows them to feel like, wow, I'm actually contributing and bringing my individual personality into this work. So you can kind of leave your footprint there.
Safe spaces.
Yes.
So necessary.
Okay.
What's tip number 4?
Tip
Amy?
number 4, recognize your power and recognize their power. So there are 3 levels of power that are always at play, no matter who you are talking to or where you are in the world. We'll start with global power. Global power is, as you may assume, it means that you have, in this current world and context that we live in, you have a lot more money. In this context, you are a male and you're heterosexual. You are probably Euro or Caucasian. You have that background. You may be able to speak English. English is a very powerful language in today's world. Or you have an ancestry or a family that is very, very economically powerful or politically powerful. So that's global level power. Local level power is in a particular room or context that you are in. So if in this room right now, if I was not able to speak English very well and Duane was, I'm the one that has less local power because in this current context, I'm not able to even communicate or express myself, whereas Duane would be able to. Local power also plays out in, also with going back to global power, it also includes age. So in our society, younger people have less power, older people, it's a very old school traditional idea, but elders have more power, younger people do not. It also filters into the local context. So those who are a bit older may have more power because we think they have more experience, which means younger people have less experience, which equals less power. So there's also personal level power. Personal means this is your self-esteem. This is how you carry yourself. These are things that are very much within your control. For instance, I have the power right now to disclose certain things about myself or not. And regardless of where I am in the world, I have that power within myself. I also have the power of determining what I wear for the day. I determine how I want to wear my hair, if I want to learn about something or if I don't want to learn about something. This also goes into particular skill sets. So if I have a skill of doing graphic designing, that's a personal power of my own. And so recognizing these 3 levels of power really puts things into context, because if you are working with a young person, globally and locally, you may have more power because you have more years of experience under your belt. You may be older. You may have kids of your own. You may have worked for that particular organization for much longer than this new younger person. So you know the audience, you know the company policies, you know the company work culture. So there's a lot of things and kind of aspects that show that you have more power in this situation. But we want to encourage that you also recognize that a young person has tremendous personal power and tremendous things to contribute into the local context of your organization. So it isn't about you having power over a youth, it's about having power with youth. And how do you combine those two aspects of power in order to create something great for the organization? It's I don't know if this is irony or not, but if you actually give a young person the room to recognize their power, and sometimes you actually, as an adult, may help them recognize their own, you will actually be a better team member, and they will actually give you way more respect than if you are walking around kind of flailing your power stick, power tripping, and not recognizing that just because a young person may not have experiences or everything they're doing is the first time, that they don't have power. And so being able to recognize that they can learn, that they can improve, that they have a lot to offer from life experience, and it doesn't have to necessarily be work experience, that really encourages a really safe working environment.
And realize that your power can play out in like many levels. Like it could be microaggressions, every day to day, just little very subtle things that you do that you don't realize is communicating a message to the youth that you're working with, that's making them feel like they have less and less power, or it could be outright, sometimes just power tripping, like you have the power over something, whether it be financial, whether it be your position, and therefore you're holding out. I could talk for personal experience. I remember, well, just recently, actually, we done some work with the organization, and it was work that we were offering them at a subsidized level. And we were also putting in a lot of extra volunteer hours just to make sure that the program went beautifully and smoothly. And the first pilot was a huge success. We went above and beyond in so many areas. And when we were renegotiating the contract for the second installation, we were obviously requesting that we do it at normal price range now, so that we can properly pay our staff, and seeing that we had contributed so much the first time around, we figured the second time around they would be a lot more willing to pay us what we deserved. And the power dynamics became interesting because first, they wanted to keep things at that level. That was what they were comfortable with. But then second, when it came to, okay, fine, we have to look at this again and renegotiate it, all of a sudden it was, well, let's see, what's your curriculum? What's your schedule? What plans are you having for this? What does this what does this money go into? Or, it was just very, whereas the first time, it was okay, you have freedom, come in, do your thing. They're not even asking questions about what curriculum or what schedule, just keep us updated if there's any events. And now it's well, let's walk through the entire thing together, because now you're asking more of us, right? And that was an example where the financial power that they held over us caused them to put us through a lot of hoops and all this extra work in order to feel like we deserved the right to get paid the way that we should have gotten paid to begin with, So that's a big example, just huge power tripping. But then there are, again, it can be very subtle. It could be just microaggressions. So just be very mindful of the position and the power that you hold, and create a safe, warm, and inviting space for youth to flourish in. Definitely.
I can also give examples of microaggressions. So in many cases, if I've seen maybe one or two young people at a table that are predominantly adult, and a young person will kind of fumble through their words to figure out how exactly to get their idea out to the table. And oftentimes an adult will step in and say, oh, I think I know what you mean. You mean this, 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 this. And the conversation will actually keep going off of what the adult has summarized for the young person, without checking in with the young person to say, So is that what you meant? Am I correct in my
Right.
summary of what you're saying? And so often those assumptions kind of go without the confirmation from the young person. So that's kind of a really slight day-to-day happening, but it's really impactful for a young person, because that the message that sends to them says, like, well, you're not important enough for us to make sure that we have your message very clearly. So yeah, that's just an example of a microaggression. Great.
All right. Tip number 5. This goes back to my last example. Experience is not a form of payment. It's not. If you want the youth that you're working with to make your organization a priority, then make them a priority. It's not only about validating a young person's contributions for them, but compensating them for their time, effort, and value added. Be realistic and upfront about the potential for pay and about what you can currently offer. Like, just have that conversation from the get-go so that everyone is walking into the project on the same page about what the compensation looks like.
Yeah, we often see a young person being asked to either do a speaking gig or even an art piece, where a manager of a charity says, yeah, well, it's this weekend, the event's happening, and yeah, we'll try and find money. We'll try and find money to pay you.
Right.
But the young person may not have the experience of, like, okay, invoicing ahead of time and ensuring that the charity has that money to pay them.
Right.
And so often they may pay half or even no money after the event, because they say, oh, well, we couldn't find any money.
Right.
So they are human beings too, and young people need to be compensated for the value that they add to an organization or an experience. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Also, particularly if we're talking about young people who have come from low-income families or neighborhoods or experiences, it's a really big decision to decide to come to a meeting where they don't know if it's beneficial or not for them. They don't know if it's going to be helpful for their career or the future. And they have to pay the $6 round trip, for instance, to pay for public transit to get to this meeting and to come back home and to spend 2 hours or 1 hour at a meeting. If they know that maybe they could have made $20, $50 somewhere else for those hours, especially when they don't even know what the organization or the meeting is about. So I've seen that very often, where organizations expect that young people just have the time and that they have the resources to be able to commit a couple hours to a meeting, when they don't even tell them what the meeting's about, what the agenda is, why it's important for them to come and contribute to the meeting, and not offering any fare to contribute into the public transit for them, or even offering some food or snacks at the meeting. So that's just a reality of when you're working with young people who may not have their parents to ask for $6 just to go to a meeting.
Right. Yeah, and I think a big piece of it is communication at the end of the day. Just having really good communication with the youth that you're trying to involve in your program, and letting them know what the expectations are ahead of time. And don't assume that, because you're having a big event and there's chance to network with other people, that's going to be enough of a reward, So yeah, I think that moves into another one of our points as well, where let everyone know what the resources are available.
Yes. I think that's our next one. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. Well, this one is equally as relevant. But silence is a part of the conversation. So referring back to the example I used about a young person being in a meeting, often young people are coming from contexts where they are not necessarily asked for their contributions, or they're very used to circumstances where they only speak when asked or when prompted to. It's also really nerve-wracking for someone who has less experience to talk in front of a meeting of 5 people or even 3 people, and to speak up and say, this is my idea, I'm not sure if it works, I don't know if it's a good idea, I don't know if it's realistic for the organization, but here it is. And that takes a lot of courage. So what we're recommending is to allow for a couple seconds of silence, to say, maybe that young person just needs that extra time to muster up the courage to speak up. Or you can invite them in. You can prompt them by saying, Janice, do you have any contributions? Do you have an idea, or do you have any questions? I think asking the question allows for them to clarify what exactly we're doing, or what's the point of this meeting, and like how they can contribute their ideas. Often another thing is jargon, and sector language is also at play. So a lot of young people who don't have that work experience in the sector may really get lost in terms of just sector language that you use. And so being able to create space for them to say, at the beginning of the meeting, you can say, we may use a couple words, or we may start going on a tangent. Please ask us if you need clarification. And sometimes that's not even enough. Check in during the meeting and say, Janice, are you cool? Like, is everything, are you following? Yeah. Do you have any questions? That's really, really helpful to create, again, safe space for them.
Yeah. Like, I know from example, like there were some times that I was in a meeting with Amy, and it was just everyone from the sector. And even I'm educated, like I have my degree in social work. And even still, I was lost, like in the language. And I was like, what's going on? Like, I'm not even following anymore. I just felt like completely overwhelmed, and like I was out of my depth, even though I'm sure there could have been so much that I could have contributed. And like, if it wasn't me, like asking Amy, what are they saying? What does that mean? And that's because I had a safe space in a person that I could even ask those questions. So if I didn't have that safe space in a person, then I would just be silent for the entire conversation, right? So just keeping all of that in mind, building that rapport so that you can be a safe space for youth, so that they can feel free to even ask you questions.
And like 9.5 times out of 10, if you don't create a space where they can ask questions, they're not going to come back. That's just reality. Like all of our experience, like if you don't create the space for people to ask questions, especially about jargon and language, they're likely not going to come back, because they don't feel like they can even communicate or understand with anyone. So that's just something to keep in mind. Cool.
Tip number 7, make all resources known. I think this is the one I was referring to. So it may be harder for marginalized or underrepresented youth to feel safe in even seemingly safe spaces due to various forms of violence that they've experienced. So this goes back to microaggression, microaggressive violence. It could be physical trauma, or it could even be institutional or systemic violence that they're experiencing. So make them aware of the available resources before they even have to ask, to make it as safe of a space as possible for them to work at their optimal level. So this could look like, just to let you know from the get-go, we have a few tokens or whatever the public transit fare in your city is available for you, so that you can come to and from our meeting. Or, just to let you know, lunch is being provided. Also, rearranging the office space, you can let them know. Like what the situation is with that ahead of time. You can let them know where the washrooms are. Just getting them a good idea of like, what are the resources, where are they, and kind of like laying all of that out, so that sometimes it's even awkward to just ask, like, by the way, can I get like public transit fare to go home, or like that can be super awkward. Or, by the way, is my lunch being covered? So like just laying things out from the get-go can really help.
To give some examples, I've seen, for instance, a manager or someone who's hired a youth says, why don't we go out for lunch today? And the youth kind of pauses, because they're like, well, I don't want to have to be the one to say, are you going to pay for it? Or is the organization going to pay for it?
Yeah.
So it's a lot, just easier for everyone if you just say, let's go out for lunch. It's on me.
Right.
Let's go.
Right.
And then it just kind of, reduces all the anxiety and the awkwardness.
Yeah.
I've also heard from different organizations in Toronto who work with youth who used to be in gangs. and their experience is very much about physical violence and street violence. And so for them, they had to create their whole office space for these organizations. They had to create their office space so that no youth had to sit with their back to the door. That meant that anybody could come up behind them, and they're very used to having eyes on their back. Because that's how their lifestyle was. And so they had to literally and physically change the office space furniture so that no young people had to walk in and not know who's coming in through the office doors. So things like that are just helpful to say ahead of time. And number 8 is give a job title. It's a really easy and simple thing to do. It allows the young person to feel validated for their roles and responsibilities. It also clarifies any, job duties that they have to do in that role. And it also helps for that young person on their resume to be able to say in a future job interview, this is what I was. I was the volunteer coordinator, or I was the manager of events, or I was, equity officer, whatever you want to call it. It's just a really great way of validating them, and also saying in future jobs, even if they were paid minimum wage, or if they were, interning, to be able to say, yes, I was doing this really important role at this organization.
I agree.
Yes. Next. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so tip number 9 is get to know the youth's interests and goals. So this helps a lot with finding a fitting role or responsibilities that they're really going to enjoy. And if they enjoy what they're doing, they will offer more to your organization, and you might be able to support them in growing in this direction within your organization or other future job opportunities. So that one is really important, because a lot of times we have an idea of what we're looking for, what kind of youth we want involved, and how we want them to do. But do we know what they're looking for and what interests they have, and how that could even create even more of a beautiful experience in your organization than with what you were trying to do, right? So getting to know the youth, again, this goes back to that building rapport piece, really getting to know the youth and what their interests are, why they decided to take this opportunity, what they're looking to gain, will really help clarify the kind of role or position or responsibility that they want to take on, and that will help them flourish in your organization.
It just creates a space that's enjoyable for them, and they also they'll probably grow at an exponential rate when they're doing something they enjoy. I mean, that's kind of common sense, but and then also because they're growing, they're able to contribute even more into the organization.
Right.
So the last tip number 10, is to appreciate and foster their intangibles. So marginalization, and this is a very broad kind of summary, but marginalization prompts particular skills and perspectives that may not be tangible. There's just it's an experience that I think makes people of all ages, not just young people, really resourceful in particular ways that someone who isn't marginalized has never had to do. It also provides a different worldview and a different perspective about people in general. They may have a particular knowledge set of their neighborhood that you may not ever experience. They use creativity in a whole other way because of a lack of resources or a lack of access that they have that you might have. And part of that also goes into their artistry. Marginalization often leads to creativity and artistry because they need a form of expression. And so that's something also to kind of look for and ask if that's something that's that they can contribute into the organization. So their resume may look completely empty, but these aspects of appreciating their intangibles focuses on things that aren't on their resume. But this is stuff that's coming from life experience, and that makes them unique human beings, as we should be appreciating them for. So that's essentially our top 10 tips.
Top 10 tips, right there.
Thank you so much, Amy and Duane. Those are amazing tips. I think they're amazing because as an academic who has done quite a bit of work in this area, and I've read a lot of manuals. I've read so many how-to guides, and your suggestions and tips are unlike any of them. They're extremely different. They're real. They're down to earth. But they do, however, and I want to mention that they do resonate with some of the academic work that I've done. Some of the themes that you brought out were cultural readiness, the cultural readiness, social and structural readiness, and economic readiness within organizations. I was asked to share a bit of, to frame some of my, to ask you some questions and to frame it within some of the work that I've done. So just as a doctoral candidate, I had the opportunity to do a research fellowship with a great organization here in Toronto called the For Youth Initiative. I think they're a founding member of GYC, actually.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, so I'll just share a bit briefly what I found and why I did the work that I did. FYI, short for Youth Initiative, they have a new strategic plan which prioritizes supporting youth leadership development pathways for marginalized youth. And so they asked me to do a review of literature on a whole bunch of things, positive youth, academic-y things, positive youth development, critical youth work, youth leadership development, and youth-led social entrepreneurialism. I also reviewed their program data. And one of the outcomes of this research was a model that I produced, which I'll share a little bit about, on promising evidence-based practices for building the leadership capacity of marginalized youth and organizational capacity of youth-led organizations. So what did I find when I did this work? The literature is limited in that it's mainly from the United States, and urban and marginalized there means something different than it may mean here. So let's just qualify that. But it does say again and again that youth recognize that youth have expert insights into their lives and their communities. Your point about the intangibles. And that based on these intangibles, accessing those intangibles become really important for problem solving, solution building, and that if youth are not involved in these processes, then you're losing a big piece of the puzzle. That youth standpoints offer solutions to challenges that adults from the outside or even from the inside may not be able to see. And that there are multiple reasons. I mean, there are so many reasons to engage structurally marginalized youth in our organizations. And one of the reasons, though, that stood out for me when I did the review was that there was no youth voice in the conversation, which brings us back to why it's so important to hear from you today. There is a lot that we don't know. After this huge literature review, there remain a lot of questions, and so I'm happy that your tips actually really contribute to a huge gap. So thank you for that. Despite a broad acknowledgement of the potential of and the need for supporting specifically youth leadership development, there's a big gap between research and practice, and each need to learn from each other. There's a need specifically that what I found in terms of youth leadership development, and you can sound back on this because there was no youth voice in this review, was that there's a need to clarify what is meant by youth leadership. Currently, it functions as a kind of Rorschach test where people see in the word their own beliefs and values and practices, and many of those have a history in Eurocentrism, can be quite patriarchal, and reflect a certain way of being in the world. And so there are questions about whether or not that's the model that we want to be reproducing, or that will really connect with youth and be meaningful to youth. So also to review what we think about when we say that word, unpack that, to look at the models that we're putting forward. Are they adult-centric? Are they reproducing hierarchies that are themselves exclusionary? And there's a need to focus on skill development that moves beyond the individual. So that, like your point about youth being able to see the end of the project.
Right.
So you have some consequential action associated with your work.
Right.
And that you can connect your experience beyond yourself, but to a broader collective.
Right.
And so I also found that it's important, and you spoke to this, to contextualize these opportunities within youth's individual, cultural, political, and gendered experiences that get to know the youth, get to know their strengths, get to know their goals approach. And that the literature suggested, again, making that connection between the individual and the community, developing those connections. I mean, one of the logics of this is that if you're interested in community development, there's a connection, that ecological positive youth development approach, that there's a connection between youth wellness and community wellness, and that youth need to be involved and participate in community wellness, and vice versa. Like it's a circle and a cycle. So the model, what I pulled out was that we might, in these projects, aim for collaborative approaches to and social change approaches to leadership development that integrate both personal and social development needs, that personal and individual and community level needs, and that cultivate new skills, 21st century skills. I think we don't talk about that a lot in the youth sector for youth leadership development programs. How do we cultivate collaboration, innovation, that sandbox opportunity, and participatory practices where power is equitably shared? So the model suggests, and the literature suggests, that we can think about 3 ways of investing in youth leadership. One is around cultivating leadership understanding that connects head, heart, feet, hands, that's intellectual, cognitive, affective, and skill-based. Not just learning about spaces for reflection, that silence is important. Processing is really important. Not just, here's the curriculum, here's the plan, here's a whole bunch of concepts, opportunities to feel it out, think about it, talk about it, experience it in conversations with peers and conversations with other people who are doing the work, sounding boards, and then opportunities, importantly, which you spoke to practice it, to do it again and again, just not the one-off, not the one-offs. So in reviewing that and recognizing, I guess a question for me is that even though research evidence is quite accessible, most people have access to a public library and to the internet. We can go on Google, we can query these things, we can ask Google, how do we engage youth? And you'll come up with a whole bunch of resources, right? But there seems to be this persistent gap still between information that's available and practice. And so what's really great, I think, about what you offer is the tangible strategies for increasing this engagement. So now I'd like to just move to hearing more from you. I have some questions that come from my background, which is quite particular in the university and in the academy, and wondering, these are really my questions based on what I've done. I'd love to hear what you think. So my first question is specifically to Amy. Amy, I recently read a blog post that you wrote, and hopefully we can tweet it out, link to it, because I think it's really a really powerful piece of writing and reflection, where you identified a disconnection between intentions to equitably and meaningfully engage underrepresented young people and the actual practices that do so. So getting to this gap, I'm wondering if you have reflected on this and if you have any thing that you can share about what's blocking us. What do you think are the things that are blocking adult and organizational readiness to sufficiently, practically, and sustainably enact these values and aims?
I think there's like 2 major things. One of them being very institutional, like the the idea of the CRA and the idea that we have deliverables because of grants and funding and funders and sponsors and donors, I think those expectations create a culture of fear in charities in particular.
It's a CRA.
Canada Revenue.
Oh.
So because of the constraints that, using the money by this date, using the money for these particular events, for these particular deliverables by this time, reporting, all of that, I think creates, this is particularly for the charitable sector though, but it's creating a sense of fear to innovate and a fear to test and a fear to experiment with young people and young people's contributions into their organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fear, I think, prevents particular maybe staff or managers to really open up the conversation with young people that go into the organization to ask, what do you want to do? Like, just that simple question is not often asked because they say, I'm worried that whatever they say is going to be way too far out from what we want to do and what our constraints are, that we won't even ask that question to begin with. And I also think that culturally in our society and also in organizations, we don't really trust young people. There's a huge distrust in what young people are capable of, how far their imagination can go to really be a realistic innovation. Like these ideas are there because they want to make these things reality. If no one ever thought that we could turn a switch and the whole room would be lit, then we wouldn't have electricity and lights right now. If no one thought that you could fly a plane or fly this steel whatever machine to go, thousands of kilometers over an ocean, then we wouldn't have planes right now. There would be no airlines, right? So, these ideas are there because the universe or God or whoever it is has put these into human beings. And so that's something to be respected and it's something to be appreciated. And so again, my tip on creating the parameters and goals ahead of time allows for that balance between reality of what the constraints are because of CRA and because of funders, while also experimenting and while also, creating new and innovative relevant solutions to our social issues that we're trying to resolve. I think those are the two major things that are always at play when working with young people. Yeah.
So this leads to, do you want to add something?
Oh, yeah. To add on to Amy's point, when you were mentioning that, I was envisioning the eco cycle, which I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but the eco cycle starts in germination and then it goes into growth and then it goes into conservation and then it goes into creative destruction, which leads back to germination. And there's a beautiful flow there. And I feel like a lot of nonprofits and charities and NGOs are really stuck in the conservation mode and very fearful of creative destruction. But creative destruction is a very beautiful process that leads to new and exciting and wonderful and innovative things, right? And so it's kind of moving with the flow and allowing it, like you say, you have to maintain a balance between yes, we have to meet certain mandates and conserve our funding and whatever at the same time, and yet still finding ways for germination to occur within your organization. Because if you look at a forest, the beauty of having a canopy, a forest, is that it allows for beautiful undergrowth to take place and come up, right? So I feel like that's a piece that a lot of organizations could really benefit from, and it would allow more space for youth.
We can send out a link about the panarchy or the eco cycle. It's essentially the symbol of infinity. The other thing I think is by being able to create safe enough space for creative destruction to occur within organizations allows that innovation to still happen and for the organization to keep innovating and growing into its newer self. But if the whole organization is just fearful of that creative destruction, then new innovations just won't come out. But it is possible to create many, levels of creative destruction within a giant organization.
Right.
Not giant, but within an organization.
And the last piece I'm going to add, which is very interesting, there's something called the stagnancy loop in between the conservation and the creative destruction. So if you don't take that full cycle, you stay in that stagnancy loop and your organization doesn't go anywhere. So that's, if you want to choose something to be fearful of, that might be better than,
I think what I see is, I'm lucky to, in my role, and beyond my role, to work with a lot of grassroots youth-led organizations. And so what I see is people taking refuge in many ways from bigger systems, saying, okay, it's not working from here, clearly, I'm going to go make my own thing. And so I know that the GYC is in many ways is doing that. It has said we're going to create our own ecosystem to address the gaps that we're finding in these bigger institutions. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about how a collaborative approach, how the GYC creates places to get past stagnancy, how you reach out beyond the GYC, just if you could talk a little bit about that.
I think, one thing I want to preface, I guess, is like these organizations that we're working with are created in most cases from our GYC experience because nobody else does it like them. Like it's this kind of idea of like, I could go to a huge charity that's like 80 years old, but they won't provide the services that are as relevant, as cool, as fun, as where I can be safe and vulnerable and express myself fully, like if me and my friends got together and created that space ourselves. And so that's partially another reason why I think they're creating their own movements and organizations. But back to the idea of collaboration and why, like the idea is like how they're benefiting from that. I think it's really about resource sharing and knowing that we're working with very little resources. It's really important that we're able to ensure that we're not wasting any resources that we do have, and ensuring that we're sharing our assets so that the assets aren't sitting there gathering dust, and that they're able to actually help advance either our own organizations like Spoken Herds or a partner organization within the network, because we know that collaboration and being able to support each other advances all of us. So I think we just know that.
Yeah, like collaboration is the future, like we know that if we are working together and sharing our resources and our knowledge and our skills, that we can create greater impact than if we were working in silos, right? And the last piece of that I wanted to add on, the thing that makes GYC magical, we are the youth that we are trying to serve. We are the youth we're serving, and so no one knows better what these services should look like than youth, right? Than the people that you are trying to serve. So like that's a huge part of involving youth in your organization, is understanding they'll know what you need to do in order to attract and better serve the youth that you are trying to work with, your organization. So I think that's a big part of what makes us special, is that we are willing to go super innovative and creative and do things that we know will work and minister to that will like serve people that are just like us,
And we also learn a lot from each other's strategies. So if one person, if one organization did an event or a program and some things worked and some things didn't work, they're able to talk to another organization to say, like, we did this with our youth and it totally bombed, it did not work. And then they can get suggestions from the other organization to say, well, we tried this technique, it really worked for us, so why don't you try it? Sharing those kind of practices just helps big time. Because no education or school is really teaching us that, so we just have each other.
I have a lot more questions for you, but I think there are questions coming in from the webinar participants. So maybe I will hold my questions and pass it over to Naomi.
Sure, thank you. That was awesome. That was a really stimulating, thought-provoking conversation. And I think it has inspired people who have tuned in to listen to think through how this could go down in their own organizations. People have been asking whether The resources will be available afterwards, and they're interested in your literature review, Rebecca, and so all of those things will be made accessible to participants after the webinar, and to others who missed the webinar, they will be accessible through our website. So for those of you who are interested in sending in questions now, just a reminder that you can use the text box on the right-hand side of your screen to send us your questions, and then I can read them out loud to the larger group so that everyone who's tuning in and listening can hear. I'd also like to encourage you to keep tweeting if you're tweeting right now, or to start tweeting if you haven't been, using the hashtag #WorkWithYouth. Okay, so we have had a very specific question come in right at the very beginning from someone named Michael, who's interested in creating a youth engagement strategy specifically for young people who are in conflict with the law. And he's interested in what a strategic partnership would look like that privileged youth engagement, that combined government, the third sector, NGOs, and I think actually those be the sort of key players, but an approach to working with young people who are in conflict with the law that centralizes youth engagement, that is not just done by the Youth Justice Division of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services, but is done in partnership with them and community-based organizations, and that works with youth who are in urban settings as well as rural settings. Specifically, they're thinking through this initiative in the context of southwestern Ontario. So I'm wondering, what do you guys think when you hear about this sort of emerging initiative where it's a collaborative approach to solving a very complex issue, where they want to be more inclusive of young people, and young people who have been systemically marginalized often may not have had opportunities to really voice their sides of the story or their concerns. What would a response look like from your points of view?
Yeah, I would say for sure that this is really, really important about safe space. Like, when it comes to being in conflict with law, their privacy is absolutely crucial. Their safe space is absolutely crucial, particularly if you're talking about being in a collaboration and working with government and working with other agencies. Be really, really mindful of, and also get basically permission from the young people to say, is it okay if we bring in this particular person from government, or if we bring in this particular program from some other agency, particularly if it's police services agency. Be very, very, very careful about who you're bringing in, and if you've already talked about it with the youth. They might even be interested in knowing the individual who's coming in to collaborate with you. I think the most important collaboration in this piece is the collaboration between your organization and the youth that you're serving. That comes number one. You may have the greatest intentions to serve them and to make a safe space for them and to get everyone involved, to support them. But I think that it would be really, really crucial to ensure that they're the first people that you're accountable to. So check in with them about everything.
Yeah. Bouncing off of Amy's point, my very first suggestion was, okay, you're going to create a strategy to help youth who've been in conflict with the law. Make sure that there are youth that have been in conflict with the law on your committee, from the get-go. And so what Amy was saying about disclosure and having confidentiality agreements so that the youth can disclose without any of the what they share being taken up legally. Another piece might be getting agencies who already do that work on board, and finding their youth leaders and their agencies to come in, get more of a collaborative approach going. So if you're creating the strategy, whoever the players are that are already doing that work in your area, bring all of them on board with some of the youth who have gone through the system themselves and know the situation. And then whatever government or NGO representatives you want to bring in, do that as well. But I would say, again, first party youth, second party fellow organizers who are already doing that work, and then third priority government/NGO, you know? So like their voices are already going to be loud because they have like the global and local levels of power, right? So you'll probably need not as many of them as you'll need of the other members. But I think that's like a great idea, as long as A, you're starting with the right intention, and B, creating the right culture in that working group or that committee to begin with that will foster the kinds of solutions that you're looking for.
There have been questions pouring in, so I'm going to move us forward. This is obviously a really important topic. A tangible question about funding, and there's been increasingly calls for funding for opportunities for youth-led initiatives. But if you're going to actually engage young people meaningfully, as you've all indicated, you need to do that from the start, from the co-creation of the grant, which you might not get.
Right.
And that is a huge issue, because you're asking young people perhaps to voluntarily contribute to the co-creation of an initiative that may or may not get funded. How do we deal with this?
I have a clarifying question for that question.
Yes.
So they're saying that if it's an adult that wants to apply for a grant for a youth-led initiative
within a larger program, right? Or within a larger organization. So one program would be youth-led, so they need to involve youth in the development of the program from the get-go.
So before they even write the grant, they want to involve youth, so that, you know, the grant is written in a way that's, you know, obviously has the youth's ideas or perspectives in mind or whatever. But then what if they don't actually get the grant? Then they have youth that have been on board that are not being compensated.
Okay.
So there might be some very practical tips around ensuring you have compensation during that phase to support their involvement, but also the emotional stakes that are involved when young people pour their hearts and souls into the development of an initiative.
Very creative. Yeah. I mean, I think they just need to think very creatively about how to recognize youth contribution. I've seen people do incredible things with their budgets, be incredibly creative with their budgets when they have determined that there's a priority there. And it's a values-based decision, a values-driven decision. And secondly, like, who do you know? Like, what's the bigger community? It's not just one organization, but connecting out would be one suggestion I would have.
Yeah, I would add to that, saying that maybe there are other areas or facets in the organizations that the youth can be engaged or employed in, beyond that particular project that would create sustainability for them, and then they can also work on this project.
A lot of your tips too, like give them a title, like how do you build that person's CV, get them so that they're able to, and when this doesn't happen, they've developed a whole skill set that they can bring to another place.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with like holding the space of that whole process too. So like, even if there's no way you can pay them, right? But you're bringing them on board, like holding the space where you're giving them a title, you're letting them feel like the outcome is the grant, right? For now, like the outcome is the proposal, the grant, and you know, wow, like great job, like we've worked really hard and we've gotten this proposal together and submitted it. Whether, you know, it works out or not, like, okay, cool. But at least like this is something we've done together. And then like you said, the title and everything like that. So that's something they can put on their resume and have volunteer hours. And then if it does go through, added bonus, you know?
Yeah, I would say as long as you're honest from the get-go, again, like it's just about that creates safe space for everyone to go into it and be invested in it. So be honest about, we may or may not get this grant, but maybe as a backup, let's look at other options, either partner organizations or other roles in the organization, or other ways of fundraising, like crowdfunding or doing a fundraising event. So those are backups, and then that way you guys are all moving on the same page and really being honest about it, and that way they can also have the conversation with themselves to say, do I really want to be volunteering my time into this? Am I really that passionate about it? And if they are, then that's great. At least they're doing it knowing what's happening.
I agree.
So we have so many questions coming in that some of them I think we're going to have to address sort of post-webinar in the form of blogs and Twitter chats, tweet chats, and other creative avenues. But some I can start to bundle a little bit. Some people are writing in questions about very specific and sensitive issues. So how do you engage young people meaningfully around issues like suicide prevention, grief, loss, and trauma, particularly young people who are living in communities that don't talk about any of those things, that may not have names for those things, and that this hasn't been part of their normal like lexicons, way of talking about their worlds and their experiences. So the hot, scary, intense topics and issues, where do we fit in youth engagement there?
Yeah, I have an example of that. Recently, Spoken Heard and New Mentality partnered to do an event called Introspect, A Glimpse Within, that was surrounding mental health. So it's an artistic exploration of mental health. And of course, a part of mental health is bringing in a lot of these other issues like grief, loss, like issues of equity and social justice, like issues of, just all the traumatic things that can happen in life. And so we found that by partnering and creating an event and fostering and curating like a beautiful space and warm environment where it's, everyone's sharing their experiences and they're finding creative ways to share, right, as well, so that, you have to speak the language of the youth a lot of times. And like creativity and artistic expression is like a big language that a lot of youth use. And so we had like poets, we had singers, we had MCs or rappers, we had live painting, and we interviewed with Jamie and Amy and GYC. You could talk a bit more about that. We interviewed one particular survivor throughout the event where she disclosed like her experiences going through the mental health system, everything that she, experienced. And it was a hugely emotional and very vulnerable like space where like, a lot of people had tears in their eyes, but because we were holding the space together so beautifully and using various forms of expression to go into the topic matter, it allowed for, so I would say find ways to like foster conversations, and so that it's not just when something happens in the youth's life and you have to console them. Yes, definitely then. But also on a regular basis, if you have these kind of conversations or event community spaces happening, right? You're creating that space where people can talk about these and get it off our chest. It's so taboo to speak about in our communities, like in marginalized communities, super taboo. It doesn't get talked about at all. So this was the first one. And it was decently attended, and I know that as we continue to do that, more and more people will attend because everyone sees the need for it. Like it's so important.
I think also if it's in the context of maybe a group that meets weekly, for instance, then let's say the young person talks just to the one staff person. I would say definitely don't call them out if it becomes the group session. Always ask permission with the young person to say like, do you want me to keep this just between us? Some things are very obvious, but some things maybe they're just opening up to you first, and then they would actually not mind to speak to the whole group. Sometimes having the support system of the rest of the other youth to actually, like Duane was saying at this event, for other young people to actually relate with them and say, yeah, I actually have a similar experience, or wow, I really feel for you. That's healing for sure.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think in my experience, when a young person opens up to me in a one-on-one conversation, I'll have a couple conversations with them at the beginning. I'll feel out if they're ready to talk to a professional if need be. I'll ask at some point, do you want to talk to someone that has way more experience than I do in a more professional role? Or do you just want to continue with me? And so I kind of give them the choice.
Sorry.
I feel like we as a community need to have more conversations about what a safe space is. I put that to YouthREX as a request that we have a conversation about safe spaces.
And also brave spaces. Something one of my coworkers brought up the other day, like not just safe spaces, but brave spaces where everyone is honest and able to like really convey the intense like things that are going on with, exactly, in a space where other people are, on the same level. Yeah, my last point for this would be, I really feel like it's a really good idea also for all the like organizers and adult allies to try to seek out like training or courses in like, like
Trauma
DBT, trauma therapy, or even like using artist therapy. Like try to get like that experience, because a lot of times it's going to fall to you to have those really sensitive conversations with the youth, and you need to be prepared, so yeah. And yeah, there's so much more to say, but I think we have to move on.
Yeah, well, we're over time by 3 minutes. I'd like to propose that we take another 3 or 4 minutes to do one final question that is a linking of a few people's questions around working with multi-generational teams. So how do you facilitate equitable participatory structures when you have one person sort of like Generation Xers who might be more comfortable with traditional Western models of leadership and participation, and young people who may not be, as well as young people who may feel like they're not empowered to speak when there's a knowledgeable adult in the room who seems to have it all figured out already. And so how do we work in these complex multi-generational groups to really be authentically equitable? There's the question.
For me, I use a practice called art of hosting. It can also be called participatory leadership, but the fundamental values of art of hosting is that every single human being, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of your 3 levels of power, is valuable, and that their words contributing into the circle are equally as important as the next person. So facilitation is an incredibly important skill set. If you are doing any work with young people or with marginalized people, definitely get some training or skills around facilitation and hosting, because it teaches you a lot about how to have difficult conversations and also how to navigate power dynamics within a group. So that's my suggestion.
And then like there's another layer on that, which is like it's a bit like hard for some people to hear. Equality is the general standard that like we would love our society to work on. Right now, unfortunately, things are not equal. And equity is another layer to that. And I don't know if everyone's seen that like little cartoon or diagram where on one hand you had like a short person, a taller person, or whatever, medium size, and they're all trying to see over the fence, and you had everyone on the same box, right? So the shorter person still could not see, so then in the second one with equity, one person needed to have 3, another person didn't need to have any because they were tall enough, and the other person just had 1. And so it's really like balancing it out with the art of hosting is like making sure that the voices that are even more marginalized and unrepresented have even more of a chance to express. And like we use that phrase, what is it? Move out, move in, move up.
Move
Is
up,
it?
yeah.
Move up,
move back.
Move back. Exactly. So like if you're more you're more tending to speak and be overspoken, or if you're holding more power, maybe you need to move back a bit and check yourself. And then for those who are less likely to speak or who have less power, push them forward and ask for their voice more, and then that's a great way to like host a space where like everyone's messages are getting across in an equitable way.
Yeah, and it's important to actually voice that during the meeting. So it's not just your own practice of ensuring the introverted people are talking, but really say that in the meeting to say, okay, everyone and also it's really helpful to actually ask the people who know that they're introverted to raise their hands, to say, are you guys often feeling like you have so many ideas but you don't speak them up? Raise your hand. And then people can be mindful of who's in the room and how much time am I taking up, and maybe that person actually would say the same thing that I'm going to say 5 seconds later. So I can just be quiet, wait until they speak, and then I can go.
And then this goes into right relations, but we love to do like agreements, like set agreements, like how are we going to relate to each other, and do that before we start the meeting or the committee. These are our agreements. These are the ways that we're going to have relations between each other, and that sets the tone from the get-go.
Yeah, and writing it on a chart paper for everyone to see so that
Yes.
everyone can agree, okay, yeah, I really want introverted people to step up, or I
Yes.
really want us to really deeply listen to each other. So these are examples of agreements that you can put up on a chart paper.
Right.
There's some a term that came out of your research, Rebecca. As adults, in terms of our readiness, we need to
Step up to step back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Step up to step back.
And I
There
think
you
in general, we could just listen
Yeah.
a little
Yes.
harder, a little deeper, a little more.
go. Passionate listening.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to draw it to a close. You guys, this has been intense. Thank you so much for bringing the energy, for bringing the honesty, for really digging in deeply and with some humility. Rebecca, you used that word at the beginning, and I think we need to listen, we need to be humble, we need to step up to step back, and we're going to do good things in the world together.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.